Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our special coverage of the Russia-Ukraine file. When the Russian military operation in Ukraine began 3 weeks ago, many thought it would end quickly because of Russia's military strength. But as the war drags on and Ukraine digs in, two questions are increasingly being asked. Can Ukraine win this war, and what will it take? These questions and more will be asked to our panel of guests via Skype. We have Dr. Oleksandra Vityaganets, Ukrainian international lawyer from UK. Thank you for joining us. And we have Sudanese Professor Muttasim Al-Harith Dawi, media and political professor consultant, political analyst and strategist, also from the UK. Thank you for joining us. The discussion begins after this break. And before we delve into discussion, let me share with you some live updates of the hour. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky suspends pro-Russian political parties, saying the activities by politicians aimed at discord and collaboration will not succeed. Zelensky condemns Russia's siege of Mariupol as a war of crime, as Russian forces push deeper into the port city. The British Ministry of Defense says Russia has failed to gain control of Ukraine's airspace. China says it stands for maintaining peace and opposing war, and that time will prove that its opposition on the Ukraine war are on the right side of history. The United Nations maintains at least 847 civilians killed in Ukraine, 6.5 million internally displaced. And Russia claims it used Kinzhal hypersonic missiles for the first time in Ukraine. While Russia has occupied the southern city of Kherson, Ukraine's military and civilians have prevented the Russian army from taking control of other major cities. Russia has also suffered significant casualties, with conservative estimates putting it at more than 7,000 troop deaths, according to the New York Times. What's your comment in this, Dr. Oleksandra Vityaganets?
Thank you, colleagues, for bringing this discussion. I think it's very important to raise the awareness of what's happening in Ukraine, just to try to stop this war as soon as possible and prevent further atrocities in my country. Your question was in terms of Russian losses, and obviously there are terrible losses in terms of people, in terms of civil infrastructure on both sides. According to data published by Ukrainian Prosecutor General Office, by 20th of March, there were about 14,700 Russian soldiers dead. And again, we understand that these are only estimates, but with all these figures, which unfortunately do not express all that sorrow and what's really happening with people on both sides, you can understand the scale of this terrible war. So we, from our side, our government do not give any comments on losses, but we understand that only about 3,000 civilians in city of Mariupol, which been seized now by Russia, and in Kyiv, which is also the main target for Russian Federation. Only about 3,000 civilians died today, and we understand that these figures are highly undervalued. I also know that more than 115 children, at least 105 children, being reported to be killed by the 20th of March. About 140 children been injured. more than 2,000 crimes of aggression and war crimes have been registered as committed in Ukraine. So I understand that this is, as I said, these are just some figures which tells you nothing about atrocities happening in Ukraine. But with just this data, I hope you can appreciate the scale and the intensity of invasion and war which is happening now in my country.
Very nice indeed. The reason for Russia's lack of battlefield success started before the invasion began and can be attributed to systematic issues, including corruption and poor training and bad assumptions, according to political analysts, of course. How do you read this, Professor Muttasim Al-Harith Ad-Dawi?
Well, thank you. And let me start by a minor correction, please. I'm not a professor. Okay, so I haven't.
Sorry about that.
I'd love to be a professor at one point in my future, but I still not. Let me start by saying that no one, and in principle, no one in their right minds would agree with the concept or the principle of war or going into war. Everyone is appalled by the human losses, by the losses to civilian lives, the losses to properties, etc. And I think all parties in this conflict do agree that there needs to be an end to this war or military action or invasion, however you might call it or prefer to call it. There needs to be a very swift end to this situation, which is because it's an awkward and this is an abnormal situation. All parties agree to this, and it is. I think that it is a very good sign that increasingly we have seen more and more signs from both parties, from the Russian and the Ukrainian sides, that there is a need, an urgent need to sit down and have negotiations that will eventually and hopefully very soon will lead to end this misery, because loss of life in misery, military action is a misery, okay, and everyone is affected, as the doctor has just mentioned. Everyone is affected, everyone is negatively impacted by the situation. Now, the situation as it stands, the Russian is steadfastly increasing the Russian side, is steadfastly increasing its operations on the Ukrainian soil. How will this end? Okay. There needs to be some sort of equilibrium to be met or to be achieved that satisfies the Ukrainian aspirations for restoring the situation back to its normal status. At the same time, taking into account that Russia is the bigger player in the equation, if I may put it this way, okay, there needs to be some sort of appeasement, of not really appeasement, some sort of answering the requests by the Russian side, of course, in full tally with the Ukrainian demands or the Ukrainian requirements. How and will this equilibrium be achieved soon? This question remains to be seen. However, I see the very basics, the science, till now, or the writing on the wall says there is going to be some sort of agreement soon, as both parties have already realized that sticking to their initial stances at the very that were existing at the very beginning doesn't really lead to a swift end to this situation. Let's wait and see. It's a matter of prediction at the moment that what is going to happen. Bearing into account that although the Russian military action or invasion is still ongoing, there is clearly signs that they do not want to escalate the situation on the ground just in order to avoid the human losses or losses to civilians. And that in itself shows that there is room for negotiation, that the Russian side is waiting for some sign, some positive sign in their view that will lead to a successful conclusion of the situation at the negotiation table.
Very nice. Let me share with you this info. Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konatchenkov said for the second day in a row, Russia had used hypersonic missiles in Ukraine, this time to destroy a fuel reserve of the Ukrainian army in the south of the country. Let's have a listen.
From the waters of the Caspian Sea, cruise missiles based in the sea caliber, as well as from the Crimean airspace, hypersonic aeroballistic missiles fired by the aeronautical system Kinjal destroyed an important reserve of fuels and lubricants of the Ukrainian armed forces near the colony of Konstantinovka. From this base, the main fuel supplies for the Ukrainian armored vehicles were made in the combat zones of the southern Ukraine.
Did Putin truly believe the things that he said about the Ukrainian people welcoming them, or did they just fail to understand that the Ukrainian armed forces of 2022 are far different from the Ukrainian armed forces of 2014 when they annexed Crimea and began their adventures in eastern Ukraine? Dr. Alexandra Vetyaganets.
I'm not a military expert, of course, but as Ukrainian, I can give my opinion what happened, and I also can comment on other experts who understand this better than I do. So the most common understanding in Ukraine is that Putin simply miscalculated people's moods, miscalculated Ukrainian statehood, miscalculated people's feelings that they do not want to go back to Russia. They don't want to be back to the Soviet Union. They don't want to have anything with that anymore. And what happened is really something unique and something unpredictable, is that the whole nation being united, and to the extent that we never been united before in our understanding that we are Ukraine, we are independent, we want to have our own statehood, we will not leave our land, we will not leave our houses, and we will fight for our freedom, we will fight for our families, we will fight for everything we have, basically. Mm-hmm. And that was the miscalculation that the so-called operation will go as smoothly as they overtaken Crimea back in 2014, when nobody actually fought for Crimea. And the reason for that, it was stakes were different, the army was different, and also moods and feelings of Crimean people are also could be also different, because it's not a big secret that many people in Crimea they were pro-Russian. They've been receiving Russian passports way before Russia annexed Crimea, and they pretty much, maybe of course not all of them, but there was a good percentage of population who actually welcomed that annexation, and they wanted to be part of Russia. And the rest of Ukraine is absolutely different. And also now, when we see what happened and how much blood and how much death has occurred during these 3 weeks of Russian invasion, I think this gap is just getting bigger and bigger, and people just start hating the Russians. Some hate the Russians as a whole nation. Some hate, some understand that not all Russians are bad, and there are many who would oppose this war and who would side with us. But this is very difficult to like a state who commits all these atrocities on your land. We witness how little kids, innocent kids, being shelled and bombed. The whole family is being shelled in a car trying to flee Kiev or other cities. So the Putin wanted to get Ukraine back to USSR, but what he gets like absolutely the opposite. That's in my opinion. So we will fight. Of course, we understand that every minute of negotiations and every time passed, it means that more deaths, people dying, children dying of hunger in Mariupol, which been seized by Russians for weeks now. They are there without medical help, without food, without access to water. And these massacres, which of course we understand what's happening, we of course have clear understanding that we are fighting with one of the biggest army in the world. And to bring this to an end would be in the interest of both parties. But we want to have some sort of securities, clear securities that we now agree on a settlement. And this will not happen again in a year or 2 years or so, because this would be just postponing the war and not trying to resolve the situation.
Very nice. Perhaps I want more a technical answer to this question, Professor Muttasim Al-Harith Al-Dawi. Still with the previous incursions, according to analysts, the incursions by Russia provided Ukrainians with training by fire and allowed them to identify and adjust to shortfalls quickly. Adding that, Russia is also struggling with logistical problems this time around. With all these factors in mind, can we say Russia could certainly fail, either in terms of strategic objectives, defeat on the battlefield, or both?
Well, I don't think so. I just may take into account that the Russian side has, to date, has only deployed about 1/10 of its military power. I mean, in terms of arms, and it hasn't used to date any highly sophisticated arms or missile systems. The Russian side is playing, or actually trying, to make sure that the civilian casualties are minimized, and therefore so unlike the situation when they there is room. I think there is room for comparison. When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan back in late 1979, okay, it was a heavy-handed, heavy-blooded invasion, and there was total disregard of the population of the civilians. However, in this case, due to the ties, to the blood ties, the cultural ties, historical ties with the Ukrainians, I mean, there is an interchangeable. We can talk about interchangeable culture between the two nations. Therefore, it went very, very easy on the civilian areas. The main focus was on the military. The army, Ukrainian army, and its bases, the infrastructure, and the infrastructure which is deemed by the Russians to be of vital importance to the defense operations. That is to say, like airports, air bases, etc. However, and therefore, they are treating with great care. I mean, the Russians are treating with great care. They don't want to alienate the Ukrainian people, especially in view of the fact that it's not only blood ties and cultural ties, also in view of the future, looking into the future aspects of the relation between the two nations. The Russians are basically, the main request, if I have gathered correctly, by the Russians is trying to ensure that the Ukraine will stay a part of its sphere of influence in the region, especially in view of the fact that the way they perceive it, the Russians, that they have failed to preserve the situation where they had a security buffer zone made by the ex-countries of the Warsaw Pact. Almost all of those countries have joined the NATO now, and the Russians feel that if they lose Ukraine as well, that will be the last drop in the that will terminally and finally put the national Russian security at great risk and great danger, and therefore it's a totally different. While the Russians, while they have reluctantly looked at and followed when, say, other countries in the ex-Warsaw Pact have joined the NATO, this is a totally different. And they perceive Ukraine as the last bastion in their defenses in their national defense policy and strategy, and therefore it is therefore that makes them steadfastly. Even the Russian populations that are increasingly steadfastly is opposing, say, a withdrawal, if you may call it that, a withdrawal from the Ukrainian land. And the Ukraine is a totally different story for the Russians, and therefore, if some sort of political agreement cannot be achieved soon, I believe, I hope not, but I believe the military action or the invasion will continue for longer periods.
Perhaps Dr. Alexandra wants to comment on your statements. Yes, Alexandra?
Absolutely. I just wanted to comment on my colleague's statement. I won't comment on everything, but you said that Russians do not want to eliminate Ukrainians. And this is such a lie, absolute lie, because there are plenty of evidence showing that Russians bombed maternity hospitals, Russians bombed hospitals, bombed cities like Mariupol, Kharkiv, Kiev, and cities around the Kiev. Civilians just being shelled, trying to flee to somewhere, to a safe place. What Russians are doing is quite the opposite. They're trying to eliminate population. It's actually their main idea to go to Ukraine was to cleanse Ukraine of Nazis. And I don't know who are those Nazis, because when I heard that, I asked, is it my mom? Is it my family? Are those my friends who you call Nazis? Because we are not Nazis, as in my honest opinion. So I think that this is again the spread of Russian lies, that Russia just trying to protect themselves, that they just wanted to establish their dominance, and because of NATO was enlarging their borders all these years. And it was so unfair in Russians. And what they're trying to do now is some sort of very clear, very honest military operation to establish their influence in Ukraine. But this is absolute bullshit. This is not true. Russians deliberately target civilians, The whole family is being killed by Russian bullets. And what they are trying to do is to bring some sort of terror to Ukrainians, to try to push us to accept their unfair terms for the settlement. And that's what's really happening. Please do look. There are plenty of evidence on the internet. And luckily, we live in a digital era where people have their phones, where people have internet, and all this being documented. And at some point, Russia will face the consequences of all their actions.
Very nice. And in a further note, the Australian Prime Minister announced the extension of sanctions against Russia following its military operation in Ukraine, immediately banning all exports of alumina and bauxite, while promising more arms and humanitarian aid for Ukraine, as well as social or coal, to help Ukraine generate power. The aim of these sanctions is to hit aluminum production in Russia, which depends on Australia for 20% of its alumina. Let's hear it.
The government has imposed an immediate ban on Australian exports of alumina and aluminium ores, including bauxite, to Russia, which will limit its capacity to produce aluminium, which is a critical export for Russia. Late last week, it came to our attention that there was a ship that was due to dock in Australia this week to collect a load of alumina bound for Russia. That boat is not going to Russia with our alumina. Last night, we put the sanctions in place which will prevent that from occurring. Australia will donate 70,000 tonnes of thermal coal. This will help Ukraine's power generators operating and supplying electricity to the power grid at this critical time.
Back to you, Muttasim Al-Harith Dawi. Obviously, despite all these global sanctions against Vladimir Putin and his country, he's not changing his mind. Russia wants to control Ukraine and have it, be it a non-Western leaning state. But according to analysts, the Ukrainian people have shown that the invasion alone will not eliminate their Western ideals, and they would not accept a president who was chosen by Russia. Yes.
Yes, just let me start by just your esteemed guest. I think she misheard me. I didn't say eliminate. I said alienate, to make an enemy. I think it's due to the fact that I'm not a native speaker of English, so I do apologize if that got across in a total wrong way, and therefore hence her answer. I think the sanctions are. Of course, gradually those sanctions will have an effect on the Russian economy. That's a fact. No economy, no country in the world whatsoever can stand and bear the consequences, the costs of having sanctions imposed on it in the longer run. However, I think if we look back at the very first sign, the very first clear sign that there's going to be some sort of military operation or invasion, or however you may call it, in the Ukraine by the Russians was as far as I recall, it was towards mid-December last year when the Russian government called upon the U.S. government, that there needs to be some sort of discussion about the situation of Ukraine and its joining the NATO or the EU, etc., etc. I think that was the very first indication that there is some sort of Russian intention to find a solution, whatever that solution may be, to what they perceive as the security risk coming from Ukraine. They can moving towards the West. Since then, I think, with that sign being said at the time, I think that was the time the Russians, especially in view of the negative reply they received from the West, I think that was the time they started planning not only the military operation or / invasion, but also how to deal with whatever sanctions that may come in the foreseeable future. I'm just trying to read and link the incidents here, or the events that took place over the last few months. I have no clear information about that, but when forward thinking about it, a military action doesn't only come with moving deployment of forces on the ground, deployment of arms, etc. It comes also with dealing with the economic, with the food security, etc. I mean, other factors have to be taken into account, and I think that's something that didn't fail the attention of the people at the Kremlin. The fact, or the question remains, how severe will those sanctions will kick in the Russian tummy, if I may use this term. This remains to be seen, especially in view of the fact that the Chinese side is playing ball. I mean, in the economic side, they're playing ball, and also the India is playing ball with the Russians. There's a higher cooperation in economic terms, and especially in view of the fact that the Russians have some sort of they feel that even the main gas pipe or gas line that connects them, and which exports their gas to West Europe, might get shot. If the Europeans get enough pressure from the Americans, it might get shot down say within a year or two, as has been in the news. So they are looking for alternatives, and they are proactively looking for alternatives. That is China, primarily China and India. Which one will take effect first, or which one will come first? That remains to be seen, of course. However, all sides are playing the time game. That is to say, the Russians they are focusing on extending to some extending the pressure they're exerting on the ground, on the Ukrainian soil, by targeting more military infrastructure. And of course, I might, if I may, revert to the point raised by your esteemed guest. Yes, of course, there are atrocities. There will always be atrocities in a war or invasion or military action. These things do happen. I'm very sorry to see any human loss anywhere on the world, because we're all human beings. However, it is a factor to be taken into account whenever these military actions erupt anywhere. Back to the sanctions, I think the sanctions will have an effect, and the Russians are trying to evade that anyway. Again, which will take place first, whether the Americans will
apparently the sanctions are not enough, because we see that the Putin's administration, or Putin himself, is really determined to continue this operation. And for Ukraine, I believe that Ukraine would define victory as the complete expulsion of the Russian troops, not just this recent invasion, but to get to the borders back to 2014, before Crimea was illegally annexed. What do you think, Dr. Alexandra?
Yeah, that's exactly what our president is saying. So his position is to restore historic borders of Ukraine as of the date when Ukraine gained its independence from the Soviet Union. So it includes Crimea, it includes now occupied Donetsk and Lugansk and all other territories. We have very little information from the ongoing settlement discussions, and whether they would want to compromise on any of these demands or not, we don't know. At the moment, the position is very clear. We want our country back. We are prepared to discuss in the neutral status of Ukraine, our commitment not to join NATO in return of some sort of guarantees of security and so on. But again, where we end up in this settlement discussion, in these peace talks, we don't know.
I get back to you, Muttasim. Would Ukraine define victory as the complete expulsion of the Russian troops and getting back to the older borders? Do you have any comments that you would like to add?
Yes, please. I don't think. Of course, I do understand that this is the Ukrainian official and probably even the popular view. However, I don't think that in reality, I don't think that will materialize at least in the foreseeable future, especially in view of the fact, if we assume that the return to the 1991 borders is something that to be considered, then the Russian side will not just say that, what about the Minsk Accords that they were signed negotiated through the initiative by France and Germany, and with the Russian side and the Ukrainian signing as signing parties in 2015, that gave Donbass and Luhansk gives them some decentralized or special status, if you want to say, within Ukraine. So going back to the 90s, I don't think it's an unachievable objective at the moment, at least in the foreseeable future. Of course, they're having aspirations to return to those borders by the Ukrainian people is fully legitimate. But what about the real realities, the geopolitics of the region, the world view that return of that step, or if it materializes at some point. Especially, I think we need to take into account here that what your esteemed guest has just mentioned, that back in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, there was hardly any response, international response. I mean, almost everyone kept quiet about it. This is a fact. I mean, and therefore I don't think it is something that is achievable or that can be achieved
anytime soon.
Yeah,
indeed.
I don't think
so, on the real ground and with the realistic point of view, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin holds a press conference in Sofia with Bulgarian Prime Minister Kirill Petkov, with whom he discussed strengthening the eastern flank of NATO. The Bulgarian Prime Minister says that his country will continue to do everything possible to help the Ukrainians, but that sending military aid will not be possible.
Our conversation was focused on what we can do to strengthen the eastern flank here and what we can do to increase interoperability.
Bulgaria will continue to do everything possible to help the Ukrainians in this harsh war and this enormous aggression that the Russian Federation is inflicting on them. But being so close to the conflict for now, sending military assistance to Ukraine will not be possible. It should only be granted after the approval by the parliament.
Back to you, Dr. Alexandra. Apparently, the whole world is saying our heart goes out for you as Ukrainians, and we see aid coming in from different countries, be it armaments, be it financial aid, but nothing is on the ground. And the President Zelensky himself expressed his disappointment regarding not having let's say, a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia. Do you expect that this could really escalate and go to this? Seeing this recent statements by several officials, they are avoiding this, let's say, call it all-out war.
I do not expect that they will join Ukrainians in fighting against the Russians. It was clear. They all made clear statement that you won't see our boots on the ground, in particular from NATO. NATO would avoid direct confrontation with Russia by any means. And I understand this from the perspective that all countries care about their national security and their state interest. That's why, yes, it is disappointment for us, but we understand the reasons for that. And that being said, many countries and the majority of the world are now side with Ukraine. We would not be able to resist to Russia for 24 days, or how many days it's been since the 24th
So despite
of
all
February.
the military aid that Ukraine is receiving, you're saying that Ukraine cannot stand up against Russia?
Saying that Ukraine would not be able to stand up without all that military, economic, humanitarian, and all possible help which we receive from the world now.
Yeah,
it is, in my opinion, this is perfectly clear. And just the fact that Russia is claiming some sort of victories, but in fact they haven't managed to occupy Kiev, to occupy Kharkiv, or any Odessa or any other major city which they would plan to.
Since we're running out of time, I would like to hear Al-Harith Dawi about this particular point. If there is anything you would like to add in few words, since we're running out of time.
Yes, I think I just need to re-emphasize that the Russians are deliberately not following a heavy-handed policy in the military action or the invasion of Ukraine, because is the blood, the cultural ties, etc. They want to achieve achieve some specific goals, and they want to continue with that, with this action until at the negotiation table those terms will be met. But meanwhile, they want to preserve the situation, and I think it's back to both governments to see an end to this. Hopefully very soon, because there's misery, there's carnage, of course, on both sides. Of course, more on the Ukrainian side, but everyone would like to see an end to this very soon.
We're all hopeful to see this being concretized on the ground. Thank you so much for both guests for joining us live here from Algiers. Our special coverage come to a close for today. See you perhaps tomorrow with a different coverage. Thank you so much.